Hello and welcome to The Artisans. I'm Sterling Lynch. On today's show, we're joined by Marc Adornato. He's a contemporary fine artist whose artistic development may have been shaped as much by the size of his home as his desire to mash up and reassemble the world around him. Hi Marc, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Well, have done research. Zouch magazine says you're impossible to pin down as an artist. Now, is that by design, or is it just something that happens naturally through your work?
Yeah, it's definitely something that happens naturally. I get people asking me a lot of times, like, so what do you do for your art, or what's it about? And I'm like, oh man.
Don't worry. Be happy.
From this day forward, we will follow in the path of fascism, Nazism, and totalitarianism.
When someone's like, what do you do? I don't know, like, I guess I do kind of sculptural stuff that you put on the wall. And yeah, it's hard to pin down, but it can be done.
Rather than trying to pin you down, maybe you can take us through the story of your work. So you probably started somewhere, and where are you now?
Yeah, that's a good starting point at the beginning. I guess it was around 2000 when I actually went to school to be trained. So I got very traditional fine arts training at NASCAD University out in Halifax. And then from there, I came back to Ottawa. So I started mainly with sculpture and using recycled computer technology and kind of discarded gadgets and gizmos. And I'd basically take them apart and then put them back together in other bizarre forms. So I made, weird sculptures like a Robo-Christ or something like this. Or I took a typewriter apart and made a robotic arm out of that. So I was really into the sculpture stuff. And then I started moving I got in my own apartment, and I realized I just didn't have the space to be doing this kind of thing. So I got into more digital mediums, so Photoshop and digital imagery, visual digital stuff, and video. So I got heavily into creating kind of mashups where you take appropriate copywritten footage and then you remix it and mash it up into saying something else.
Clint also discovered that many people found being near a dead man's hand objectionable.
Happy tinkering to the scientist, the mad scientist. Thanks, Elizabeth. Now here's Lou.
It's getting interestinger and interestinger.
Heaven help us. Whether this is a blessing or a curse, life as we know it is never going to be the same again. Thank you, Michael. Well, I mean, when we come back, something so totally different. What are we worried about this for? But everybody wants to lose weight without dieting. We're going to show you how you can actually do that.
So for a bunch of years, I did video, kind of a video propaganda. It was really kind of creative and interesting, but a little bit heavy on the political side sometimes, Recently, in the last 2 years, I bought a house out in Gatineau, my wife and I, and she hates basements. So she gave me the whole basement as studio space, which is awesome. And it's also got a double garage, so I've got a workshop in there. And it's just been awesome since then. So I've exploded back to sculpture again. So now I'm really heavily into doing sculptural things and still using recycled objects and everything, but yeah, so I'm getting back more into the where I began, where I started off, actually. Yeah.
Now, one of the recurring themes, it sounds to me, is the notion of tearing apart and putting back together again. If that's right, where does that come from? What's the catalyst, do you think?
It was funds. I didn't have the money to go out and buy paints and brushes and all the canvases. So I started to use objects that I could find. And of course, stuff in the garbage is easy to find everywhere, or dumps. And a lot of times it was very interesting stuff, like circuit boards and all that kind of, so the materials were neat. And of course, when I am making art, I'm always trying to reflect elements of society, like what's happening in the world today. And one of the things, of course, that we see is we're a real throwaway society. So using materials from garbage or dumps or found objects was an easy way to get going. So that's kind of how I started using those objects. So as I went from using new gadgets and throwing out robotic stuff to going and digging up antiques. So now I find stuff from the 1880s to like 1950s, 60s, 70s, and use that as my objects. And it's really grown the quantity of stuff that I've been able to make. As I said earlier too, I used to start with video, and before it was called video mashups and remixes. That's what I was doing. I was taking bits of footage, splicing it and remixing it and taking it in some other context.
Tonight we have the story of a Canadian company that crossed a spider with a goat.
So I think that's kind of what's also happening in the sculpture element, is I'm taking objects, tearing them apart, and then remixing them and reconfiguring them into new things.
Well, maybe we could talk a little bit about your process, because one question that comes to mind for me is you're working with found objects. Do the found objects drive the project?
The process of it is that I kind of actually sit there and watch the news a lot, you know, and I'm following what's going on in the world and certain current events. And from that, I get inspired, or usually kind of there's an emotional reaction to the news broadcast or to what's happening, political injustices, whatever. And that spawns an idea. So I'm like, okay, I want to make a piece of art about, you know, the pipelines, or I want to make a piece of art about, well, whatever it is, Apple and Microsoft taking over the world. So I'll take that kind of stuff as my ideas and inspiration, and then I'll go to my pile of junk and just kind of start placing pieces in the canvas. And like, sometimes I'll sit there and I'll place it. I never like fasten it down instantly. It's very much a thoughtful and long process of placing objects on there and then sitting back and thinking about it, maybe switching out one object, changing the angles on them.
You mentioned earlier before camera that you're on a bit of a break right now. Do you have a sense of where you might be going, or is it just a blank slate?
Yeah, that's the neat part. Is I mean, I've definitely spun off in the last 2 years into this direction of creating like recycled objects with antiques. So I definitely got a storage full of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to carry on that path. But I'm not quite sure, now that I've done the Made in Canada series and I feel that it's kind of wrapping up, what the next path will be. I'd like to incorporate more technology into the artworks. But I'm still, it is interesting, because I'm looking at kind of like I mean, so many possibilities with art. You can make whatever you want. But I'm going to let it tell me what to do, I think, you know?
Well, that's I couldn't think of a better way to end it. So thanks so much, Marc. We look forward to seeing more of your work and what the possibilities hold for us.
All right, thanks, Sterling.